Europe before the crankshaft. At the beginning of the 16th century, Europe was not yet the center of the world. It was a continent emerging from the long shadow of the Middle Ages, still shaped by feudal loyalties, religious authority, and fragile trade networks that depended on land routes older than memory itself. For centuries, wealth moved slowly. Spices from India, silk from China, and precious goods from the east crossed deserts and mountains by caravan. Every step increased the price. Every border demanded tribute. Trade was profitable, but painfully limited. Then, in 1453, Constantinople fell. With the city's fall, Europe lost control over the main arteries that connected it to the east. The Ottoman Empire now stood between Europe and its most valuable markets. Trade did not stop, but it became unpredictable, expensive, and politically dangerous. Faced with this reality, Europe did something radical. It turned toward the sea. The ocean, once feared and avoided, became an opportunity. But opportunity alone was not enough. Geography, technology, and political will would decide who ruled the waves. Portugal moved first. Positioned at the edge of the Atlantic, Portugal had little interest in continental wars. Instead, it invested in ships, navigation, and knowledge. Portuguese sailors learned how to read the stars, understand winds, and survive long voyages across open water. Slowly, methodically, Portuguese ships traced the coastline of Africa. Each journey brought new information. Each return reduced uncertainty. Until finally, the impossible happened. Portugal reached India by sea. For the first time, Europe had a direct maritime route to the east. Spices, once luxuries reserved for kings, now flowed into Lisbon in unprecedented quantities. Spain followed a different path. Seeking a western route to Asia, Spanish expeditions crossed the Atlantic and encountered an entirely unknown continent. What they found was not Asia, but vast lands filled with gold, silver, and civilizations unprepared for European conquest. Spanish wealth did not come from efficiency or production. It came from extraction. Gold and silver flooded Spanish ports. Entire economies were fueled by resources taken, not created. Spain became rich quickly and dangerously dependent on that wealth. In 1494, this new global order demanded structure. The Treaty of Tordesillas divided the world between Spain and Portugal. With papal approval, an imaginary line was drawn across the globe. Lands to the west belonged to Spain. Lands to the east to Portugal. It was an act of breathtaking confidence. And one region was completely absent from the agreement: the Netherlands. At the time, the Netherlands was not a nation in the modern sense. It was a collection of provinces under the control of the Spanish crown. This created a historical irony. The empire that ruled the seas also ruled the Dutch. Life for an ordinary Dutch citizen was harsh and restrained. The land was flat and unforgiving. Much of it lay below sea level. Survival required constant labor, building dikes, draining swamps, protecting fields from floods. Farming was difficult. Fishing was dangerous. Winters were long. There were no gold mines to exploit, no silver to extract, no distant colonies to plunder. The Dutch had only one advantage: they had to work. While Spain grew rich through conquest, Dutch society evolved through discipline. Trade, craftsmanship, and efficiency became necessities rather than choices. Spanish authorities understood the risk. The Dutch were learning shipbuilding. They were mastering navigation. They were trading, not for glory, but for profit. If allowed unrestricted access to the seas, the Dutch would not seek empires. They would seek systems. So Spain acted. Dutch ports were restricted. Trade was controlled. Maritime ambitions were deliberately limited. Access to global routes was denied. The Netherlands became a nation facing the ocean, but forbidden to claim it. And history teaches us something crucial. When expansion is blocked, innovation begins. The Dutch would not challenge Spain with armies. They would not compete with Portugal through conquest. Instead, they would do something far more dangerous. They would redesign production itself. And the foundation of that transformation would not begin with a ship, but with a machine. By the late 16th century, the Netherlands had reached a critical realization. If it wished to survive, let alone compete, it needed ships. Not a few ships, but many. Not warships built for conquest, but merchant vessels built for speed, efficiency, and volume. Trade was no longer optional. It was existential. Yet shipbuilding, as it existed at the time, was painfully slow. Every plank of wood was shaped by hand. Trees were felled with axes. Logs were split and sawn by teams of men pulling long saws up and down, hour after hour, day after day. A single large ship required thousands of precisely cut wooden components. Time, not ideas, was the enemy. In Spain and Portugal, this inefficiency was masked by wealth. Gold and silver could pay for labor. Delays could be absorbed. Ships were symbols of empire, not units of production. The Dutch had no such luxury. They had no treasure fleets, no colonial gold, no cushion for inefficiency. Every extra day spent building a ship was a day without trade. Every delay meant lost opportunity. The Dutch response was not to build bigger ships, but to build smarter ones. They redesigned hulls to carry more cargo with fewer sailors. They standardized parts wherever possible. They treated ships not as monuments, but as tools. But even the most efficient design meant nothing if production remained slow. The true bottleneck was wood processing. To build ships faster, the Dutch needed to cut wood faster. Human muscle had reached its limit. At the same time, the Netherlands was surrounded by a quiet but powerful force, wind. Windmills dotted the landscape. They already pumped water, ground grain, and powered simple machinery. The question was no longer whether wind could do work. The question was whether wind could replace human hands. Here lay the fundamental mechanical problem. Windmills produced rotational motion, but sawing would require a straight, back and forth movement. Nature spun in circles. Industry needed lines. This mismatch had limited machines for centuries. Somewhere between necessity and imagination, a solution emerged. A rotating shaft could be transformed. A circular motion could be broken, redirected, converted into linear force. This was not merely an improvement. It was a conceptual leap. In 1597, a Dutch millwright named Cornelis Cornelissen of Ugeest applied this idea in a way no one before him had scaled. By connecting a rotating shaft to a crank and rod, he transformed the continuous spin of a windmill into the rhythmic motion of a saw blade. Up, down, relentless. Human arms were removed from the equation. This mechanism, the crankshaft, was deceptively simple. Its power was not in complexity, but in repetition. Once built, it never tired. Once tuned, it never slowed. Wind became labor. For the first time, shipbuilding was no longer limited by muscle. It was limited only by materials and imagination. What had taken days now took hours. What had required teams of men now required supervision. Wood flowed. This was not just a mechanical innovation. It was an economic one. The Dutch had not invented a better ship. They had invented a faster way to build ships. And speed, in trade, is power. The machine did not conquer oceans, but it made conquest unnecessary. In the next phase of this story, ships would multiply, trade would scale, and an entirely new economic system would quietly take shape. Once the bottleneck was broken, everything accelerated. Wood no longer waited for hands. Ships no longer waited for wood. Dutch shipyards began to operate on a scale unseen in Europe. Hulls were laid side by side. Masts were raised in sequence. What had once been craftsmanship became coordination. Ships were no longer singular achievements. They were outputs. This transformation reshaped trade itself. A merchant no longer asked, "Can I afford a ship?" The question became, "How many can I deploy?" With speed came frequency. With frequency came reliability. And with reliability came trust. Trade routes stabilized. Schedules formed. Expectations emerged. Commerce found rhythm. The Dutch ship was not the strongest. It was not the most ornate, but it was the most efficient. The Flight, a cargo vessel designed for volume and minimal crew, carried more with less. Its purpose was not dominance, but throughput. In trade, efficiency beats power. As ships multiplied, markets expanded. Baltic grain, Scandinavian timber, Asian spices, goods flowed inward, goods flowed outward. Amsterdam transformed from a port into a node, not a destination, a system. This scale created a new problem. No single merchant could fund such vast operations alone. Voyages were long, risks were extreme. Storms, piracy, war, disease, all could erase an investment overnight. Trade had outgrown individual wealth. It needed something new. The solution was not technical. It was financial. Instead of one man funding one voyage, many people funded parts of many voyages. Risk was divided. Profit was shared. Ownership became abstract. A ship no longer belonged to a person. It belonged to fractions. In 1602, this idea crystallized into a single institution, the Dutch East India Company. For the first time, a corporation was granted the right to wage war, sign treaties, govern territory, and trade globally, backed not by a king, but by investors. Capital, not crowns, commanded oceans. Shares of the company could be bought and sold. Not ships, not cargo, not journeys, but expectations of future profit. This required a place, a physical space where belief could be traded. Thus emerged the world's first stock exchange. Here, information moved faster than ships. Rumors changed prices. News reshaped fortunes. Value became fluid, invisible. The Dutch had not simply mastered trade. They had invented a system where money could reproduce itself without touching goods. Ships moved cargo. Markets moved expectations. This was not the end of innovation. It was the beginning of acceleration. Because once capital learned to flow, it would demand new machines, new methods, and new scales. The world had entered a feedback loop. The machine made ships faster. Ships made trade scalable. Trade made capital mobile. In the next chapter, this system would escape the sea and begin to reshape land, labor, and life itself. The Dutch did not set out to invent capitalism. They were not chasing ideology. They were not imagining economic theories. They were solving problems. Wood had to be cut faster. Ships had to be built cheaper. Time had to be compressed. The crankshaft did not change the world by force. It changed it by rhythm. With each rotation, labor was transformed. Human effort no longer defined speed. Muscle no longer set limits. Motion became continuous, predictable. This predictability changed everything. When production becomes predictable, costs become predictable. When costs are predictable, prices stabilize. When prices stabilize, profit can be calculated. And when profit can be calculated, investment becomes possible. The Dutch did not just build ships faster. They built confidence. Confidence that a voyage would depart on time. Confidence that cargo would arrive. Confidence that returns would follow patterns. Trade stopped being a gamble. It became a system. This is where wealth accelerates. Not through conquest, not through plunder, but through scale.
Other European powers sought riches by controlling land. The Dutch sought riches by controlling flow. Goods, ships, money, information.
The crankshaft did something revolutionary. It detached wealth from physical presence. A man no longer had to sail to profit from the sea. A craftsman no longer had to touch wood to earn from ships. Ownership became distant, abstract. This abstraction is the heart of capitalism. Value no longer lives in objects. It lives in systems. Amsterdam became the engine room of this system. Capital pooled, risk spread, profit multiplied. Money began to move faster than goods. The Dutch Republic grew wealthy not because it was large. It was wealthy because it was efficient, because it trusted machines, because it trusted schedules, because it trusted systems over individuals. Other nations would later copy these ideas. Factories would rise, engines would roar, empires would expand, but the logic was already written. It began with a simple insight. Motion can be mechanized. Production can be scaled. Profit can be planned. The crankshaft did not just turn wood into planks. It turned time into money. Capitalism was not born in a manifesto. It was born in a workshop, with a rotating shaft, a repeating motion, and a society willing to trust the machine. The Dutch did not discover wealth. They engineered it.